want to talk a little bit about how you became involved with the ILAE and then how you came to want to seek the presidency?
Sure. Yeah. Seek is an interesting word. Yeah. I was thinking, I was reflecting on this before because I hadn't really thought about this. Young people, some of the yes people have asked me, how do you become president of the ILAE? And I thought, well, just, kind of, it kind of happens, right? But then your question prompted me to look at how did I get into it? I started way back in, 2000, I don't know, maybe even the 90s, in serving in some leadership positions in AES, the Epilepsy Foundation, which used to be the Epilepsy Foundation of America, leading some groups and task forces in the NIH, NINDS, the CDC, for example, and then president of the Canadian League Against Epilepsy, right? And then this is all before 2000 and I would say 2005. And then after 2005, I was invited to chair the North American, what was then the North American Commission, is now ILAE North America. And that was from then on, I think that my involvement with international or large national organizations has been almost purely with the International League. I was commission chair, and then after that, I started getting into the probably more political, you would say, because these are all elected positions. So from the moment there is an election, it's political, right? I ran for secretary. Nico invited me, Nico Moshe, right? And then after that, ran for treasurer, and then after that for president of the ILAE. Was there a conscious decision at the beginning, like, I'm going to get involved in the ILAE so that I can become a president? Not for a moment, never, ever. I think it's very clear when you decide you're going to run that you want to be president, but even at the time when I was treasurer, which is the last position I had before being a president, I was considering whether I should or not, right? It was never a trajectory that I planned. I guess there's many ways of doing things. I tell young people there's many ways of doing things. There are people who have their eyes set on this and they work like crazy until they get to that goal. It wasn't like that for me. But that's probably because that's the way I operate. Yeah.
I mean, it's very much the same for me. I never came into the ILAE with a view to ultimately becoming president. I came into the ILAE because I was, as I said, I initially chaired the Commission for Pediatric Epilepsy Surgery, or it was a sub-commission actually. I had the audacity to suggest it might become a commission, and then very quickly learned that that's not the way you did things within the ILAE at the time. But then, I was brought in, I was commissioned for pediatrics, and then, I had a lot of encouragement from people along the way, not least Emilio Peruca and Nico, who brought me in to be chair of the Global Outreach Task Force, which was trying to define the difference between global campaign and other things at the time. And then ultimately the suggestion that we ran for Secretary General or ran for the Management Committee. And at that time, as people know, no woman had actually succeeded in getting onto the Management Committee. Now, I've never done anything because I'm different. I do it because I think maybe I can make a difference, and I enjoy what I'm doing. So I ran, and I was the first woman to be elected to the Management Committee, and I was made Secretary General. I was re-elected and then I became treasurer. And yes, you go through that decision. Ultimately, you're thinking, yes, I plan to run for presidency, but then you do go through the phase of thinking, is this what I should really do? And not least because you want to do it well, and you want to be able to do it in line with everything else you do, because this is an extra thing on top of everything from the day job. And I made the decision, yes, I would run. But that wasn't because, as again, I'm the first woman president in the over 100 years of the ILAE history. It's because I feel that I'd got to a stage where I felt I could make a difference, that I would like to be continue to be involved in the leadership. And I enjoy working with the people I do. I know it's a real privilege. And so, as I said, no, I never set out on my ILAE journey with a view to becoming the president. It's something that evolves over time. I wouldn't want to do it if I really didn't feel that I could contribute in a major way to the workings and the way we work as an international organisation.
You know, and I think that there were clear goals, and you know, they had to be sort of in generic terms stipulated at the beginning of your term, right? Like what do you want to achieve? And I think that you can do that with moderate certainty only, because you don't know which direction things are going to go. Take the pandemic, for example. It's an extreme, but there are many things like that, right? You don't know what the dynamic is going to be among your executive committee, your management committee, the new people on board. But, you know, there were clear goals, right? And so, for example, restructuring of the ILAE was one, and it has been restructured very substantially, you know, with creation of councils, with, you know, the creation of the ILAE executive board, in the sense that it's a regional board as opposed to you're a chair of a commission, and you know, I think that the involvement of the regional board is much stronger and closer than it has been for a long time. Not because people didn't want that or didn't want to try, but I think that the combination of suggestions and ideas that people brought to the table were put in place, and it just worked. And it is working, and it's work in progress. I'm not saying that we're there, but I think it is work in progress. I don't know if you would agree, Helen, but you know, I think that this is a great step forward. The second one is, of course, the executive director, right? And this is something that the ILAE had contemplated for so many years, and now it's in place, and it's incredible, right? I think that that's a great thing. You know, the acquiring of the secretariat, or having our own Congress office, which now is more than just a Congress office. It is the secretariat, right? And it is the administrative body for a lot of activities and formalization of those things. I think that that's also, I think that the current executive should be very happy with those achievements. Something that is additionally important is, you know, the advocacy aspects with the WHO, something that weren't for people that are working. They just work tirelessly at this, you know, like Ala and people preceding Ala and Emilio before her. We wouldn't be there at all, right? And so those things, you know, just, you know, came or are coming to fruition. And then education in the academy, right? This, I must say, was something I've always wanted to do, and I had sort of a bit of a dream of doing, where you create this virtual academy that is the ILAE, and then incorporate and make it richer and incorporate various aspects and so forth. And I think that this is coming along. It's a lot of work, creating curricula, formalizing things, and I think we're ahead of we're ahead of the game of many other organizations in that regard. So, you know, these are really, really good things, you know. And you asked me if I was surprised by anything. Well, the pandemic is certainly surprising, right? There's no way to put it any differently. But I've been surprised by people, not because I didn't expect, you know, people to do so much and so well, but because it just went beyond, really beyond expectation, and it is beyond expectation. So I'm surprised every day at the ability of people, the willingness of people to give, you know, to perform on a voluntary basis. Like, you know, nobody's paid. It's all volunteers, all of their own time. And it's the top professionals in the world. It's just unbelievable. Like Helen said, the group of people that we work with, it's a real privilege. It really is a true privilege. See, you know, I must say that I had no idea how this was going to play out, or how severe or intense this was going to be. I have a friend that produces in his company, you know, antiseptic products, and he was asked if he could change to something to disinfect for COVID, right? And he called me, he says, how long do these things usually last? And this was about first about 6 weeks into it. And I said, well, these things usually, because I heard a CDC person say this, I repeated it. And I said, these things usually go away in, 4 to 6 months. They look at SARS. This is how long it lasted. And we had it in Toronto. It took about that long, etc. I said, I wouldn't advise you to get into this if this is, what you're asking me, because it's going to be gone, in about 4 or 6 months. And lo and behold, right? I remember distinctly the last time I got into a plane and off the plane, because they announced that the place where I was going was now in lockdown because of COVID. And that was the last time. And this was, February of last year. So we had no idea what we were getting into, right? What I can say, however, is that in spite of all the bad and all the terrible things we have lived, right? We've lost dear colleagues to this condition. We've lost friends. We've seen people in distress, and we've seen how the world has been terribly affected, and the world has been closed due to COVID. I think that there are a lot of good things I learned or I took from this pandemic, right? We've talked a lot about resilience, right? And we've talked a lot about how people on the ground, our colleagues, our health workers, have taught us enormously about, self-sacrifice and giving and resilience. But also patients, and also people with epilepsy, and how their focus has been positive, really, even when you look at it formally in research endeavors, you can see that they've adopted a lot of resilient attitudes and so forth. So we've learned a lot about that. We've also learned about flexibility. I never imagined that we could do a year and a half of executive and initiatives and completing things virtually. It's amazing. We can do a lot, and we're flexible beings. We adapt, which is fantastic for me to see and observe, right? And see our colleagues stepping up to the plate. And we're all so fed up of virtual, right? Like Helen said, we don't want this to continue. We hope it'll end, but it has certainly taught us a lot. And then shift your priorities, right? In order to be able to function in this manner and be alert and attentive to the needs of people, and what can and cannot be done, and where you should shift your attention to. Attention has become really, really important, because when you're not seeing people face to face, you really need to be attentive, to many things, to the needs of people with epilepsy, to the changing research arena and the way things are being done, to the way people are making decisions, and where resources are being devoted, and the needs then of the organization and people with epilepsy. All of those things have shifted, and I think that's what I've learned. Yeah.
We've been in a real period of change, not least with the way we work, but also with the pandemic. We've had to adjust and adapt to different ways of working. And there's no doubt, when I set out to, and put myself forward for the presidency, key goals were to maintain and sustain and evolve the educational package, the education that we do. It's not something that sits in one term and then we stop. That's actually got to be sustained. One of the other issues was to listen to those at the ground level, to try and work towards, so not only being a top down, but working more towards the bottom up. And we've already, from our chapters, of which we've now got 123, soon to become 128, it's an ever increasing base of membership that we really need to listen to, know how we can work through the regions down to the chapter level. But then we also need to evolve with regards to looking at our congresses, looking at the way we might, generate income, even look at our publications and the way that moves forward. Mm-hmm. Because as we say, nothing stands still. We have to constantly evolve with the times. And what the pandemic has done has really made us think about the way we work. Of course, none of us want to stay virtual forever. That's, we are social human beings, and there's a lot of interaction that is so beneficial from a face-to-face and spontaneous interaction. But that, you know, what the virtual world has done is introduce different ways of working. It actually has enabled us to reach out more, in all honesty, because, you know, we can't travel everywhere, but actually utilizing virtual and face-to-face, we can get to as many things as we can. We can work as teams as much as possible. We can probably get a lot more done. So I think the pandemic, on the one hand, was, of course, a huge shock. You know, we all had to adapt. There were areas where there was a real, suffering's the wrong word, but a problem arose because, for example, research, could that carry on? But now as we move out, there are certain aspects of it that we should, you know, the ways of working that we should move forward with, as well as looking at the way we deliver our education and, in fact, our congresses in an optimal way that we can move towards face-to-face, but also utilise the virtual world. I mean, there's no doubt I'm very proud to be the first woman president. I mean, and I've been the first woman president of other things. You know, it's something that's not really, you know, I've not seen myself as any really different. I'm doing the same job and I've got similar aspirations to people of the opposite sex. It's just the fact that I happen to be wearing a dress rather than anything else. But, you know, there are certain aspects, and it may depend where you are in the world as well as what you do. And I've never really let any bias affect me in the fact that I will give as much as I get. And, you know, if I believe in something, that's what I will pursue. And if there is some degree of confrontation, then I tend to try and go around it and try and think of why somebody might be thinking in a different way to me. But, you know, I know it's different culturally in different parts of the world, and I've experienced that. And I hope that we've moved a long way than we had 10, 15 years ago, even 20 years ago. But there are still some areas where there does appear to be different perspectives on what males and females should do or where they should get to. There is also different perspectives on, you know, of course, what responsibilities individuals have outside of what they do for the league or within their day job. And, you know, I've been very lucky in that I've been supported by a partner who has firmly believed in what I do. And my daughters all, I don't think they've been deprived growing up, but they always joke that I was never there, but I don't actually think that's entirely true. But they're also very proud of what I've done. And I hope I've instilled in them that they should go for whatever they want to, but I don't expect the same of them that perhaps what I've done. But I think what has already happened is, you know, I was the first woman to be elected to the executive board, the management board, not the executive, the management board, management committee. And already we have 50%, if not more, that have been female over the past 4 years. You know, it's already opened up. We already have, and we've worked very hard to try and get gender, geographical balance right across all the committees that we have within the International League. And there are far more people stepping up to the mark to actually want to do it. So I think it happens, yes, by example, but also by encouragement and trying not to overload individuals, trying to get them to step up to what they're interested in, what they want to do, and then giving general support. And so I hope that, you know, with this as an example, I'm not going to be the last. There are going to be other women in the future. And it's going to, you know, be a much more balanced outlook as we move forward.
I'm curious if you have a philosophy of leadership or if you have role models that have sort of helped you develop your leadership style over the years, or maybe not. But if so, I'd love to hear about that.
You want me to go first, or are you going first?
Doesn't matter.
I mean, I reflected on this when you put that question there, and actually it had never struck me that I'd actually had a role model, which I have had many role models, there's no doubt about it, and I mean that both locally, nationally and internationally, people that I've looked up to who've really taught me a lot, mainly about epilepsy. But the other way I look at it is that, you know, I look at different leaders and I try and pick out the good points of the way if they've done something well, I look at how they've done it and try and incorporate that into the way I work. So I don't think there's one role model that I've developed my leadership style. I'd question whether my leadership style is the same as anybody else's. I have a very, I've never thought of the way I lead. I do it in a very specific way. I'm very much somebody who wants to interact with as many people as possible, but then try and come to a decision about paths we should go down. And I also, hope that I can be approached in a way that maybe some leaders may not be able to be. But that's is sort of style. I haven't gone down one model or another, or thought of one person. I've got a great deal of admiration for a variety of people who've helped me along the way, not least locally, such as Brian Neville, and from an international perspective, many different presidents of the EPNS, as well as the International League Against Epilepsy, past presidents who have really helped along the way. But what you do is you take the various aspects of their leadership style that you admire, and you try and emulate that. I'm not sure I've exceeded at every single point, but that's the way I see moving forward in leadership.
Well, again, Helen, I think that very, very similar to Helen. I would say, when I ask, oh my gosh, I don't have a role model that I can say, maybe there's something wrong.
I did worry that I haven't got one.
So I did what Helen did. And this is good, Nancy. Thanks for asking these questions, because it made me reflect a lot. And I thought to myself, well, it starts very early in your life, right? It really starts early in your life. Who did I learn, things that I value, like, hard work, good work, excellent work, etc., giving the best you can, etc. And that's at home, really, honestly. And then as you go along, you have these early teachers in your life, right? I remember dear teachers that motivated me and told me you can do this and you can do that. And so this idea of believing in people was instilled early on by other people that believed in me, like really early, right? And then as you go along, my trajectory is very much like Helen's, you learn things from people and you admire things, different things. The same person may have an outstanding quality that you want to emulate and others that you don't, right? And I think that's how you develop your and you try to improve. To me, it's almost a work in progress, right? Like trying to improve, trying to get better, and try to incorporate new things and not do things that are not, conducive to whatever. But, listen, being inclusive, believing in people, having an ideal or an idea, and it doesn't have to be a massive ideal, and really, working on it, believing on it, and bringing people on board. Those things I've learned from others, seeing. Now, if you look at big figures that I really admire, oh my gosh, don't I wish I had some of the qualities that Abraham Lincoln had, ability to think so clearly under adversity and lead people in such a way, or Churchill, for example, right? Or some of the, deep, internal, values in the midst of adversity, like Marcus Aurelius and things like that. But, those are really like aspirational, right? The day-to-day you learn, I think, early. So the point I want to make, I think, is that this is why it's so important to bring people on board early. I think they need to be exposed to a variety of leadership styles and activities and roles that they can then, pick the good from and emulate what is positive and develop. And I think that starts very early. I think it's very, very important that the league does this early on. And I think that what Helen and I have been doing with the Yes group and the next generation and all of that, I think that's a good thing. One thing I could say, and I think that Helen, you would agree. So when we started, Helen, with the idea of the next generation, and the leadership and this and that. The leadership, of course, was already there, but the training, but other things, you know, the mentoring, and then the creation of the section. I was truly surprised to see how effective that was, how quickly it took off. I mean, you know, those people got organized in no time. They are efficient, they're quick, they're, you know, I mean, that was really a wonderful surprise to me to see that working that well so early, right? And really an example of how, you know, well, number one, engaging young people is important and what it can do. Right, and number two, how sections in other areas could also work. But I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I think you would agree with me, Helen, right? Yeah. I mean that this was such a refreshing surprise.
Absolutely, absolutely, and they did get themselves organised very, very effectively, and how they've all embraced it. And how it's ever increasing in the number of participants we have within the young epilepsy section. And they're very keen to participate in whatever we ask them to do. And they contribute hugely. So yeah, it's been fantastic.
Yeah. I wanted to say something though that I think Helen and you and I share. And I did mention it, and I should have mentioned it earlier. I had every intention, and that is our families.
Yes.
Wow. I mean, neither you nor I, if I may say that for both of us, who would be doing this if we did not have such incredibly supportive families, understanding children, but especially supportive spouses, right? Absolutely. I mean, Anna has been my rock, really, you know. I mean, this is a very demanding job.
Yes.
In case anyone was wondering, you know, it is a very demanding job, and without a spouse that is, you know, really supporting you, not behind you, but right next to you, all along, it becomes very, very difficult. So I just want to give that, you know, express my gratitude and my deep appreciation for Anna and, you know, indirectly our spouses. Helen.
I absolutely agree. And I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the challenges for women, I mean, I couldn't have done anything I do without Graham's support. He's been with me since school. So since entering into medical school, he's lived through the difficult hours, but he's been absolutely supportive with everything I've wanted to do. And I couldn't have done anything without having that rock at home and by my side. He, you know, and the girls, I've got your 3 daughters just like you, who have been really supportive, tolerant of the non-conventionality of their mother. And I, you know, the family is really important. It's important to me, it's important to you. You know, and if they weren't so supportive, it would not be possible.
Well, first of all, I was always interested in neurology, and I think that you have that neurology bug from the times when you're a medical student. That's how it was with me, anyways. I was interested in the nervous system, especially the central nervous system and cortical function and all of that. And then epilepsy I found fascinating because I find that, you know, it is probably the most appropriate window into the brain and how it functions and malfunctions, right? So it really gives you an idea of how the human cortex, the human brain behaves, all it does, and how it malfunctions. But not only that, you also have ways of investigating it, increasingly with EEG, with imaging, with advanced imaging, with direct recordings from the cortex. And you have multiple ways of intervening. So you have medication, you have, you know, non-pharmacological interventions, you have electrical stimulation, you have surgery. So it really is a very vast field, right? And one thing that I didn't know at the time I was getting into or interested in epilepsy, but that is very, very clear now, is that epilepsy is not epilepsy, it's the epilepsies, and there are many diseases into one package, right, whose common denominator is seizure recurrence. but there are so many variables in these disease and these conditions at all ages.
I was one of those nauseating children that even before I went to medical school wanted to do pediatrics. I wanted to work with children. But I also, during the course of my medical school, fell in love with neurology, not least because the brain and the spinal cord were fascinating to me, how everything functioned in a coherent way, and also to the other extreme, how little we knew about it at the time. We didn't have lots of ways of the imaging that we have now. We had EEG, but really none of the metabolic testing or the genetic testing. I mean, it was a long time ago. So there was, to me, pediatrics, neurology, putting them together, neurodevelopment, how it could be impacted, and then all the diseases about which were clinically described, but actually about which we knew very little at the time. And there seemed to be this impending feeling that we were beginning to understand more about it. And sure enough, over the last 30 years, the door has opened up to neurological disease, not least through imaging, through neurophysiology, but through all the different aspects, and of course all the different testing, the genetics, the metabolic testing. So, and then the way I got into, to do pediatric neurology at the time, we train in pediatrics in the UK, and then there were only 2 places you could train at the time. It's very different now. And I came to Great Ormond Street Hospital, where I was fortunate enough to fall under my mentor at the time, Brian Neville. We had the first clinical MRI scanner for children. Epilepsy was the window to look at, and using it to look at epilepsy. And then it opened the door to epilepsy surgery. And I had the possibility to work with children that I had the ability, we had the ability to cure, which happened rarely in child neurology, I have to say. And so epilepsy surgery was my way into epilepsy because, as Sam has already alluded to, it became quite clear that epilepsy that was surgically treatable was one cause, one type. But then there was a whole range of different epilepsies, different types of epilepsy that then led on to different causes, and just provided that continued fascination of what can we find that's new and how can we move forward. So, and then that was also my way into the International League Against Epilepsy, because finding people who have the like-mindedness with epilepsy surgery for children, moving that forward, and then finding other avenues for which we could move forward internationally was the way that we could find. I found my way into the International League. The nearest in my family, my grandfather was a stretcher bearer in World War I, and he wanted to do medicine, but he couldn't because the family couldn't afford it. So that's the nearest my family have got. My father was a marine surveyor, my mum's a music teacher. So no medicine, and I still remain, no, tell a lie, I now have a daughter who's a doctor, but none of my siblings, one's a physio, but that's as near as it gets. So no, I did not come from a medical background, and my family thought I was completely nuts. I did want to be a dancer when I was about 10 or 11, and my father told me in no uncertain terms I was to think of something else that was more useful for my brain. No, I'm not from a medical background.
Neither am I. I come from generations of people that belong to communities where, even, going to university, like you mentioned, for your grandfather or your grandparent, Helen, was either not a possibility or not in the books, right? No, not even remotely.
I think, it's always a tough act to follow when somebody has really shown true leadership, and we have been blessed over recent years with true presidents that really are leaders, and not least you, Sam. And what has evolved over that time. It has been a real privilege to work on the management group with you, and I just hope that, I can continue it forward. I plan to continue it forward, and I know you won't be too far away because you're still on the management committee. But, it's keeping going with the momentum and the same ideas. And I think it's the leadership of actually carrying the management group and the executive group with you in yes, listening to everybody, but moving forward in the same direction, and not having different people pulling in different ways. So, I suppose one of my questions, of course, I'd be looking for top tips, but I just hope that that's the way we will move forward over the next 4 years as well.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. That's very kind. You know, I was thinking, you did say, would you have any words of advice? And I would say, well, not really, because when I think about the position, I said, well, let's think about Helen. Well, Helen is extremely skilled, well, you know, experienced in leadership, as she, you know, as Helen mentioned in various aspects. One of the, you know, best liked persons around the world that I know, you know, very respectful of people, and listening to people, right? I mean, if there's one thing Helen and I have probably discussed personally, is like, you know, I want to move on. I want to do this, you know. And Helen said, no, well, you know, they have a point here, right? And I said, okay, I'll listen. And so this is Helen, right? And tremendous organizational skills. I mean, just such a well-rounded leader, and importantly, you know, the constituency at heart. And I think that's very important, right? And goals that are pursued because you believe in them, as you said. I really have no advice. I just have, you know, I'm so happy that we have this leader to take, you know, the presidency of the ILAE at this time.